Hi, this is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina, and we're up to lesson 17 in our study on the book of Job. Today, we're going to actually cover more than we've covered before. We're going to cover chapters 26 through 31. All right, and you might question why I'm putting so much into one study, and part of it is I'm really tired of listening to Job's whiny complaints. All right, Job's friends are really tired of listening to the same thing, and he's just repeating himself. He's not saying anything or not much new, and it's just one of those things where, okay, just understand Job's got it wrong. He's blaming God, attributing all his suffering to God. And it's like I've had enough of listening to it. It makes me think of, everybody remember the movie Airplane, where the guy is telling his story to his seatmate, and you see an old lady hang herself, and then she's gone, and someone else takes the place, and the person's shooting himself. It's like, you know what? I'm getting to that point with Job. It's like, oh my goodness, I've had enough of you. I'm going to do more reading today than I am commenting, just because the Bible says that the Word of God never returns void. So I'm going to at least read you the chapters to make sure that we get through this. Okay? So let's start. And here we are in chapter 26. And here Job is rebuking Bildad for what Bildad had to say. Then Job responded, "What a help you are to the weak. How you have saved the arm without strength. What counsel you have given to one without wisdom. What helpful insight you have abundantly provided. To whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit was expressed through you? The departed spirits tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Naked is Sheol before him, and Abaddon has no covering. He stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. He wraps up the waters in his clouds, and the cloud does not burst until then. He obscures the face of the full moon and spreads his cloud over it. He has inscribed a circle on the surface of the waters. At the boundary of light and darkness, the pillars of heaven tremble and are amazed at his rebuke. He quieted the sea with his power, and by his understanding he shattered Rahab. By his breath the heavens are cleared. His hand has pierced the fleeing serpent. Behold, these are the fringes of his ways, and how faint a word we hear of him. But his mighty thunder, who can understand?" A couple of things here. He mentions Abaddon. We're going to talk about that later in the study. It's kind of important. The other thing that he makes, that interesting comment about God hanging the earth on nothing, right? In verse 7, he stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. We're going to see pretty soon down the road when God speaks. And we can tell that God was listening, because God goes directly to that comment when he basically asked Job, and I can only imagine Job's legs just shaking and his loins loosening when God says, "Were you there when I hung the earth on nothing?" You know, all these people, scientists today, claim to know everything about creation when they weren't here, right? God was here. He knows a lot more about it. And we can make theories. You know, the theory of evolution is that it's a theory. It's not a fact, is it? And it's people that choose not to believe that and think that a Christian is stupid for believing that God created the world in 6 days. They have no idea about our God, do they? All right, so let's start with Job chapter 27, verses 1 through 7 in the New American Standard Bible. And it says this: "Then Job continued his discourse and said, As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has embittered my soul, for as long as life is in me and the breath of God is in my nostrils, my lips certainly will not speak unjustly, nor will my tongue mutter deceit. Far be it from me that I should declare you right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days." Notice Job's not talking about God's righteousness, is he? He's talking about his own righteousness. And that's a really dangerous place when we start to look at ourselves as infallible, all right? I have never told a lie, says the man who's telling a lie, right? That's the way it goes. So let's go forward. Job 27 verses 7 through 23. May my enemy be as the wicked, and my opponent as the unjust. For what is the hope of the godless when he is cut off, when God requires his life? Will God hear his cry when distress comes upon him? Will he take delight in the Almighty? Will he call on God at all times? I will instruct you in the power of God. What is with the Almighty I will not conceal. Behold, all of you have seen it. Why then do you act foolishly? This is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the inheritance which tyrants receive from the Almighty. Though his sons are many, they are destined for the sword, and his descendants will not be satisfied with bread. His survivors will be buried because of the plague, and their widows will not be able to weep. Though he piles up silver like dust, and prepares garments as plentiful as the clay, he may prepare it, but the just will wear it. And the innocent will divide the silver. He has built his house like the spider's web, or as a hut which the watchman has made. He lies down rich, but never again. He opens his eyes, and it is no longer. Terrors overtake him like a flood. A tempest steals him away in the night. The east wind carries him away, and he is gone, for it swirls him away from his place. For it will hurl at him without sparing. He will surely try to flee from its power. Men will clap their hands at him and will hiss him from his place. So stubborn Job continues, undaunted by anything that his friends have said. Likely at this time, anyone who needed a bathroom break just encouraged Job to keep speaking. Hey, Job, I'm gonna go over here for a bathroom break, but you know what? Don't wait for me. Don't wait for me, because it's very likely that they've just shut down. They're not listening to him anymore. I'm not listening to him. The only person that's still listening to Job is God, which is funny because that's the one that Job doesn't think is listening to him. And he's the only one that is listening. All right? Pride and ego have no place in the life of a Christian. All right? We can't boast in anything we have, anything we've done. All that we can boast in is Jesus Christ. And we know that from Galatians 6:14 that says this, but may it never be that I would boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, through which the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. Right? Paul said it right. The only thing we have to boast in is in Jesus Christ. We're just sinners. Job is not different than the rest of us. All of us struggle with pride. So we can't really point at Job here and say he's worse than we are. All of us struggle with the same things. My good friend Jeff once told me that, I work really hard. I work really hard at being humble. And then all of a sudden I find myself being proud of how humble I've become, and the journey begins again. All right, that's really where we are. It's this journey of trying to be humble, and God calls us to be humble, but he's disgusted by pride. And the reason he is because we don't have anything to be proud of. The only thing we can boast in is Jesus Christ. All right. We know Job is a righteous man because God called him that, right? But his ego has now gotten to the point where Job is adamant about how righteous he is. So he's standing on his own righteousness. His righteousness has replaced God's righteousness. As righteous as any of us might become, we can never stand on it. The good news is, having done 2 of the 6 chapters we're supposed to do today, we are 33% done, all right, with listening to Job. All right, Job chapter 28, and we're going to go with verses 1 through 11. It says this, surely there is a mine for silver and a place where they refine gold. Iron is taken from the dust, and copper is smelted from rock. Man puts an end to darkness, and to the farthest limit he searches out the rock in gloom and deep shadow. He sinks a shaft far from habitation, forgotten by the foot. They hang and swing to and fro, far from men. The earth, from it comes food, and underneath it is turned up as fire. Its rocks are the source of sapphires, and its dust contains gold. The path no bird of prey knows, nor has the falcon's eye caught sight of it. The proud beasts have not trodden it, nor has the fierce lion passed over it. He puts his hand on the flint. He overturns the mountains at the base. He hews out channels through the rocks, and his eye sees anything precious. He dams up the streams from flowing, and what is hidden he brings out to the light. All right? So rather than put any focus on Job's description of God's creation here, let's just wait until we get to chapter 38 and God tells us about his creation. And interestingly, we can actually learn more about the creation in those chapters in Job than we can when we read Genesis. All right? I'm going to mention verse 11 here, that God does bring to light what is hidden. Likely, Job will regret those words very shortly. Accusing God and acting in a prideful and self-righteous manner will come back to bite him. All right? So let's finish chapter 28. So this is verses 12 through 28, and it says this. But where can wisdom be found, and where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living. The deep says, it is not in me, and the sea says, it is not with me. Pure gold cannot be given in exchange for it, nor can silver be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold or glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for articles of fine gold. Coral and crystal are not to be mentioned, and the acquisition of wisdom is above that of pearls. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. Where then does wisdom come from, and where is the place of understanding? Thus it is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the sky. Abaddon and Death say, with our ears we have heard a report of it. God understands its way, and he knows its place, for he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he imparted weight to the wind and meted out the waters by measure, when he set a limit for the rain and a course for the thunderbolt, then he saw it and declared it. He established it and also searched it out. And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. So what's the difference between wisdom and knowledge, all right? Or wisdom and understanding? To me, wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge, all right? A lot of times wisdom is spoken of as older people have wisdom, and part of that is experience, is that you learn over the course of your life, and then applying that knowledge is wisdom. But we know from the Bible that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? So if you think about it, when we understand God's power, right, completely understand it, and we act on it that way, we're actually applying knowledge of who God is, what he's capable of, and how worthy he is. That's just the beginning of wisdom, right? It actually can grow as we learn to trust in the Lord more. But, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. We know that from the Bible. So we can look around and we can see scientists that think science only and discount who God is and what God has done. And at the same time, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So they don't believe in God, and they don't have the fear of the Lord, so they don't have wisdom. They might have some knowledge, but they don't have any wisdom, right? And I think that, Romans talks about that as well, is that thinking they were wise, they became fools, right? That's what we see in the world today, is all these people that are so full of what they think they know, but we have a creator that knows everything, right? He created everything and he knows everything about it, right? So the fear of the Lord is trusting who he is and what he knows. And Job is speaking these mighty words in this chapter, but at the same time, he's questioning God. So it's just this complete dichotomy of really where Job should be, right? He's saying, God has wronged me, right? And I'm going to argue my case with him. It's a great example of not seeing the forest through the trees. It's okay, Job. God's going to set you straight shortly, all right? And we saw the word Abaddon here, and he says it again a little bit later, so I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'll just put let me read chapter 29. And we're going to start with verses 1 through 12, again in the New American Standard Bible. And Job again took up his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were as in months gone by, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone over my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in the prime of my days, when the friendship of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, and my children were around me, when my steps were bathed in butter, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. When I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square, the young men saw me and hid themselves, and the old men arose and stood. The princes stopped talking and put their hands on their mouths. The voice of the nobles was hushed, and their tongue stuck to their palate. For when the ear heard, it called me blessed, and when the eye saw, it gave witness of me, because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the orphan who had no helper." Right? So we can hear this, and Job's pretty full of himself here, right? He's pretty impressed with himself. But this section makes me think of the phrase that when dying, a man's life flashes before his eyes. Job is looking back at his life, right? He thinks he's going to die soon, and he's reflecting on his past. But once again, Job is wrong. He's not dying, and God has not forsaken him. Job wants it to be like it was before, back when God watched over him. I've often used the analogy that a God who never sleeps watches over us when we're sleeping, right? Like, I think about a parent. Let's say that we have parents and they have a 5-year-old son who just wreaks havoc on everything and all his waking moments. He's just tearing it up the whole time. And then when he goes to bed, his parents are in the hallway peeking in at their little terror, and they're completely in love with this child. Completely in love with him, and they're just so amazed that this is their child. And I kind of think that's the way God looks at us. We're not perfect, right? We're not perfect, but we are his creation. And because God doesn't sleep, he keeps an eye on us. And the reason is because he can't take his eyes off us, because he loves us, right? He loves us so much. He loves us a lot more than parents love their children. All right, Job thinks he's blessed by God because he honored poor people and he honored orphans. And instead, God's love is relationship, and it's based on who God is, not what we have done. Okay, so let's finish chapter 29. All right, so Job 29, verses 13 through 25, and it says this. "The blessing of the one ready to perish came upon me, and I made the widow's heart sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I investigated the case which I did not know. I broke the jaws of the wicked and snatched the prey from his teeth. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and dew lies all night on my branch. My glory is ever new with me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. To me they listened and waited, and kept silent from my counsel. After my words they did not speak again, and my speech dropped on them. They waited for me as for the rain, and opened their mouth as for the spring rain. I smiled on them when they did not believe, and the light of my face they did not cast down. I chose a way for them, and sat as chief, and dwelt as a king among the troops, as one who comforted the mourners." All right, so one word sums up this whole section: pride. All right, did you hear all of the I's and the me's and the my's? Verse 14 is a key. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. All right, whose righteousness should we be clothed in? All right, our own righteousness or the righteousness of Jesus? All right, I don't hear anything about God in that phrase or the ones that came before it or after it. I pointed this out earlier, but Job's biggest failure here is he's made that journey from trusting in God's righteousness to standing on his own self-righteousness. As believers, we're clothed in the righteousness of Jesus. He did what we could not, right? That same failure occurs in our lives. Just like Job's failing here, we can fail in the same way when we look down on others based on their sins when we're just sinners. right? I think I still struggle with it, but there's one of those things that just spoke to me somewhere along the way is when I started looking at people struggling in sin is like, that's me before I knew Jesus, right? They're no worse than I was. They're no worse, right? There's people that are, maybe they've done sins that we might put a higher priority on, murder or something like that. But one sin makes us a sinner, and one sin makes us worthy of death. So that person without Jesus is one step away from being redeemed and being where I am, right? So instead of looking out on other people and looking down on them, I was thinking in the news, we've seen what happened to, Falwell at Liberty University. It's like, it's disgusting. It really is disgusting. But the more I think about it, I think that, you know what? Sinner saved by grace is that God still forgives us, but he's probably blown his testimony, right? That's what we've talked about earlier, is that when we fall in an egregious way like that Satan can't yank us out of God's hands, but he sure can affect our testimony, our ability to win other people to Jesus, right? All right. Our sins stunk up the place just as badly, and God redeemed us. So why would we ever think he couldn't redeem others? So guess what? We're done with chapter 29. Let's go on to chapter 30. I'm going to read all of chapter 30 this time, and it's 31 verses, okay? But now those younger than I mock me, whose fathers I disdained to put with the dogs of my flock. Indeed, what good was the strength of their hands to me? Vigor had perished from them. From want and famine they are gaunt, who gnaw the dry ground by night and waste and desolation, who pluck mallow by the bushes, and whose food is the root of the broom shrub. They are driven from the community. They shout against them as against a thief, so that they dwell in dreadful valleys, in holes of the earth and of the rocks. Among the bushes they cry out. Under the nettles they are gathered together. Fools, even those without a name, they were scourged from the land, and now I have become their taunt. I have even become a byword to them. They abhor me and stand aloof from me, and they do not refrain from spitting at my face, because he has loosed his bowstring and afflicted me. They have cast off the bridle before me. On the right hand their brood arises. They thrust aside my feet and build up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They profit from my destruction. No one restrains them. As through a wide breach they come. Amid the tempest they roll on. Terrors are turned against me. They pursue my honor as the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have seized me. At night it pierces my bones within me, and my gnawing pains take no rest. By a great force my garment is distorted. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. He has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry out to you for help, but you do not answer me. I stand up, and you turn your attention against me. You have become cruel to me. With the might of your hand you persecute me. You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride, and you dissolve me in a storm. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house of meeting for all living. Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand, or in his disaster therefore cry out for help? Have I not wept for the one whose life is hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? When I expected good, then evil came. When I waited for light, then darkness came. I am seething within and cannot relax. Days of affliction confront me. I go about mourning without comfort. I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. I have become a brother to jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black on me and my bones burn with fever. Therefore my harp is turned to mourning, and my flute to the sound of those who weep. All right, verses 20 through 23. We're going to focus on Job's accusations there. I cry out to you for help, but you do not answer me. I stand up, and you turn your attention against me. You have become cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride, and you dissolve me in a storm. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house of meeting for all living. So again, we can see where Job has made that step from standing on God's righteousness to standing on his own righteousness, almost thinking that he's more righteous than God. He's calling God cruel. All right, if you think about what it means to call God cruel, is that you've made a judgment of what's fair and what's not fair, right? That as if you know more than God knows, right? When God has made these promises to us as believers, that all things come together to the good, to those who love the Lord and are the called according to his purposes. All things, not some of them. So how is it even possible for God to be loving and to be cruel to us at the same time? And it's not possible, right? There is that. You look at God's love and God's wrath, he's 100% wrathful and 100% loving, and those don't counteract each other. Just because he's wrathful doesn't make him not loving, but God's not cruel. You know, cruelty is unnecessary pain inflicted on people. God doesn't have anything that he does is that it's unnecessary. Instead, every single decision God has made, he has a purpose and a plan, right? We also see that he's crying out to God. And just because God doesn't momentarily answer, we can see David in the Psalms doing the same thing, crying out to God. And when God's not there, a lot of times it's because we've turned away from him, right? Not that he's turned away from us. But remember, it's about God's timing, not ours. It's not up to us, right? He's our Father. He's Abba Father. He's our daddy. He loves us. He loves us so much. When God promises that all things work for our good, does he mean now? It's like, yes, he means now for me and for you, Job, and for everybody else as well. When he makes that promise to us, even the difficulties that we go through are part of God making it all work together. You know, we grow through it. There's so many good parts that happen, but when we're in the middle of it, it makes it a little bit harder. All right? Job's response here is showing he's not trusting in God, and it's ugly and sad. So let's finish this ugly and sad speech by Job with chapter 31. All right? I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? And what is the portion of God from above, or the heritage of the Almighty from on high? Is it not calamity to the unjust and disaster to those who work iniquity? Does he not see my ways and number all my steps? If I have walked with falsehood, and my foot has hastened after deceit, let him weigh me with accurate scales, and let God know my integrity. If my step is turned from the way, or my heart followed my eyes, or if any spot has stuck to my hands, let me sow and another eat, and let my crops be uprooted. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or I have lurked at my neighbor's doorway, may my wife grind for another, and let others kneel down over her. For that would be a lustful crime. Moreover, it would be an iniquity punishable by judges. For it would be fire that consumes to Abaddon, and would uproot all my increase. If I have despised the claim of my male or female slaves when they filed a complaint against me, what then could I do when God arises? And when he calls me to account, what will I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make him, and the same one fashion us in the womb? If I have kept the poor from their desire, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the orphan has not shared it. But from my youth he grew up with me, as with a father, and from infancy I guided her. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or that the needy had no covering, if his loins have not thanked me, and if he has not been warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have lifted up my head against the orphan, because I saw I had support in the gate, let my shoulder fall from the socket, and my arm be broken off at the elbow. For calamity from God is a terror to me, and because of his majesty I can do nothing. If I have put my confidence in gold, and called fine gold my trust, if I have gloated because my wealth was great, and because my hand has secured so much, If I have looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon going in splendor, and my heart became secretly enticed, and my hand threw a kiss from my mouth, that too would have been an iniquity calling for judgment, for I would have denied God above. Have I rejoiced at the extinction of my enemy, or exulted when evil befell him? No, I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for his life in a curse. Have the men of my tent not said, who can find one who has not been satisfied with his meat? The alien has not lodged outside, for I have opened my doors to the traveler. Have I covered my transgression like Adam, by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, because I feared the great multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, and kept silent, and did not go out of doors? Oh, that I had one to hear me. Behold, here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me, and the indictment which my adversary has written. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it to myself like a crown. I would declare to him the number of my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. If my land cries out against me, and its furrows weep together, if I have eaten its fruit without money, or have caused its owners to lose their lives, let briars grow instead of wheat, and stinkweed instead of barley. The words of Job are ended, and there was much rejoicing. Congratulations to anyone that got through all that. You know, it's hard to read this, and it's just like, oh my gosh, he's so full of himself, or he's become so full of himself. And if you think about it, at the beginning, you know, God talked about him in such glowing terms, right? Either Job is a much better Christian than anyone else, or he's gotten a little bit too self-confident. Let's look at verses 5 and 6. If I have walked with falsehood, and my foot has hastened after deceit, let him weigh me with accurate scales, and let God know my integrity. Why doesn't he just say scales? Why does he have to say accurate scales? Is he thinking that God's going to do it and cheat, right? Calling God a cheater? But the other part is that, you know, to even make this kind of a statement, even as a believer, it's so easy to sin, right? And it's like Job's almost becoming that person that's claiming that he's not even capable of sinning anymore. That look at all these wonderful things I've done. We don't get to heaven by the wonderful things we've done. It has nothing to do with our works. It has everything to do with the work that Jesus did for us on the cross. I won't even begin to tell you the thoughts that are in my heart on a daily basis watching the implosion of the United States. And we know that Jesus said, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So even if that stuff just remains in my heart and I don't say it, it's still there, right? It's still sin. You know, Jesus told us that if we commit lust in our heart, we've committed adultery. If we're angry, we've committed murder. It's so easy to sin, even as Christians. And it's like to stand on this self-righteousness, like thinking that you're incapable of sin because of your good deeds, is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. All right? This made me think of a conversation that I had with a dear friend who's a strong Christian and has walked with the Lord for many years. And he's under the impression that he hasn't sinned for lengthy periods of time, like sometimes years between a sin. And it's like, wow, really? You know, I sin every single day, right? I know I do. Even if it's just in my heart. And when we discuss this more, is that, you know, I said, how about lust? You know, that's one of the easy ones. And he said, well, you know, I don't think lust isn't a sin. Adultery is a sin. I said, Jesus put them together. Right? Jesus said if you commit lust in your heart, you committed adultery. So is Jesus wrong? It's like, I don't understand this. I don't understand how you can even walk as a Christian thinking that you're not every single moment you're in this battle, right? Where Satan's trying to get you to sin. And it's like, wow, the great part of it for me is just understanding God's grace and understanding that he loves me, not based on what I do, but based on who he is. That's the most important part of it. You know, personally, I don't want God to weigh me on accurate scales based on my integrity. I want God to weigh me on the scale where I am judged for the life that Jesus lived in the same way that Jesus was judged for the life I lived. And Jesus paid the penalty of death that I owed. I would much, much rather be judged on that scale. Stick Jesus on the balance over there and balance my life against it. That's the only way I can do it. All right. Verse 11 and 12 is interesting for another reason. For that would be a lustful crime. Moreover, it would be an iniquity punishable by judges. For it would be fire that consumes to Abaddon and would uproot all my increase. All right, it makes me think, pointing forward to the fifth trumpet judgment in Revelation. And Revelation 9, 7 through 11 says this: the appearance of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle, and on their heads appeared to be crowns like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like the hair of women, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots, of many horses rushing to battle. They have tails like scorpions and stings, and in their tails is their power to hurt men for 5 months. They have as king over them the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek, his name is Apollyon. So even in Job, in this early book of the Bible, we see this reference to Abaddon. And here we are in the last book, in Revelation, and we see this pointing forward that Abaddon is the name in Hebrew for the angel of the abyss, and Apollyon is the name in Greek. He's reigning over these foul creatures, and I remember going through Revelation, and I've done this numerous times with different teachers. Two of my favorites were Chuck Missler and Hal Lindsey. And Chuck Missler looked at this section, this verse right here, when it talks about the faces like humans and the hair that whirs like a woman. He says, this is a microscopic organism. And Hal Lindsey, who wrote The Late Great Planet Earth, when I sat in a Revelation study with him, Hal Lindsey said that I was in Vietnam as a soldier, and this is a Cobra helicopter. I can just tell by the description it's a Cobra helicopter. So then when I taught Revelation after that, I made the point that both of those guys can't be right unless it's a microscopic helicopter, right? So the difficulty that we have is when we look forward to something like Revelation is that we can guess what the descriptions are of what these things are, but we're not going to know. But the people that are alive at that time, and they see this in front of them and they read this description, they're going to know exactly what it's referring to. It's just one of those things that just be careful making these statements that I know what it is. It's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have a clue. All right. Those microscopic helicopters are going to be attacking us. And it's like, those sound pretty scary, don't they? All right. Job was an amazing man. All right, as we close up this section, he was an amazing man. We know that from God's assessment of Job in chapter 1 when he was talking with Satan. And remember, Job 1, verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. So after we've just heard this self-righteous speech by Job of like, oh, how full of himself he's become. As I pointed out earlier, his friends have pushed him to this level, right? He probably would not have gotten to that level without their accusations. But regardless, think about God's description of Job and just think about what, has God ever described me that way? It's like, well done, my good and faithful servant, enter into your rest. And it's like, we want to live those lives that God is going to look at us and boast about us, but really we can't boast on ourselves. We can only boast on the cross. We can boast on the work on the cross. So at the beginning of this, Job is a blameless and upright man, and at the midpoint, Job starts tooting his own horn instead of tooting God's horn, right? Pointing to God of what God has done, even though God has been complimenting Job. And I think there's the danger right there, is that it's one thing for God to compliment us. It's another for us to then go around boasting of God's compliment of us, right? It's really not where he wants us. He doesn't want us filled with pride in ourselves. He wants us to boast in him and what he's done. So here we see, instead of standing on God's righteousness, Job stands on his own righteousness. And in that process, Job failed, right? The best part is that we're not finished yet, right? God's not finished with Job. God's not finished with us either. He has a process that we're learning through all our failures. God is teaching us to get better. And we can see as the book of Job ends, and I'm really thankful to be past these 5 chapters and listening to even more than that, the last many chapters. But the end of Job, the next 10 chapters are what it's all about. It's the best part of it, right? It's just an amazing part. Remember that God does not grade us on a curve, right? It's not based on what we do. It's based on, even if he's rating us as the most righteous on the earth, we're still a sinner saved by grace. That's it. Doesn't matter how righteous we are. There's only been one man that walked on this earth without sin, and it's Jesus. And I would rather be graded on the life that Jesus lived than on the life that I live, all right? If you find yourself bragging about your own godliness, remember Job, right? It's an easy trap to fall into. It certainly worked well on Job, didn't it? And it would work well on us too. The battle and the journey continues, but we already know the outcome. I am God's and he is mine, and he will never let go of me. All right? So next week, finally, we get to hear some truth. All right? Job's young friend, Elihu, enters the mix, and he's got some wonderful things to say. Once again, this is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina, and we've gotten through the tough parts. So look forward to next week. And if you stayed with me through this, I'm impressed. All right. God bless you. I'm going to do a short song today because the study was so long trying to get through those 5 chapters. And this one, we can be really filled with ourselves. We can see here that Job was. So this is what happens when we get full of ourselves, I guess. Fire, burn away my desire of anything that is not of you and is of me. I want more of you and less of me. Empty me, fill me with you, with you, with you, with you. Look forward to next week. God bless you.